Hey, Bobby Manning here. Welcome to the Garden Report, a late week edition here, Thursday as we record this. And we are excited to welcome Chris Mannix, Sports Illustrated. You see him all the time, NBC Sports Boston, talking Celtics, reporting on the NBA at large, and the author of the new Jayson Tatum cover story on Sports Illustrated. Welcome in, Chris. Great to have you here. Been wanting to talk to you for a while here on the show, so great to see you here this morning.
Happy to do it, man.
So let's start with Tatum. We can actually start with Tatum and Team USA here before we get into the story. Interesting position he's in on this team. Obviously, he had the DNP heard around the world in the first game against Serbia and goes back into the starting lineup in game 2 and has a pretty modest performance. It's an interesting team. There's a ton of talent here. Joel Embiid, an MVP, takes a DNP in the second game. But we're in this weird position with Tatum where he's coming off the championship and this huge year for his career, where he's one of the ancillary pieces on this team, whether he's playing and taking, 4 shots in this last game here, or not playing, which I think is conceivable again at some point during this run here. It's an interesting position he's in. What have you made of the spot he's on with this roster and the DNP he took in the first game?
Yeah, I think everybody on this USA basketball roster is an ancillary piece, right? Like,
Yeah.
Aside from LeBron in the starting lineup and Kevin Durant off the bench, there's really no must-have in a certain spot type of guys. And look, you're seeing that with Steve Kerr's rotations in the first 2 games of these Olympics. Like most teams in the NBA, especially, like you want consistency. Like you are succeeding if you have a lineup that's together for 70 games out of the regular season. What Steve Kerr's decided to do is to match up specifically to his opponents. So in the opener, Durant came back. Obviously, he had to take somebody's minutes, and it turned out to be Tatum in that situation. Against South Sudan, a smaller, quicker team, it was Joel Embiid that was the odd man out. And look, I understand the frustration with Steve Kerr at not playing Tatum in that opener, but I think he does make a good point that it's a 40-minute game, right? Like, and you've got, 10 guys in that rotation that are all all-star or MVP caliber. So, I don't think it was a slight on Tatum and what he can do. I just think for the rest of this tournament, Steve Kerr is going to play the matchup game. And when that happens, it's going to mean that a player the caliber of Tatum or Joel Embiid is probably going to be the odd man out.
Yeah, and it's pretty shocking to see it when it happens. And the interesting part to me was going to be how Tatum received it. And Kerr obviously said after the game that they talked about it beforehand and he received it well. And Tatum actually talked to a couple of reporters out there after the game against South Sudan. They call it a unique situation, not about one player. Competitor in you wants to play, obviously, but I'm not here to make it a story, make it about myself. We won. I was glad to get out there and play again. There was a lot of chatter over the last few days, but I was in good spirits, had a good attitude about it, not holding grudges or anything. Typical Tatum. And I expected him to not make a big deal about it. But you do wonder, because Tatum sacrificed shots with the Celtics this year, became more of a passer, changed his role, did the little things when the shot wasn't there for him. So we've seen him adjust to adverse circumstances with the Celtics just this past year. But I was thinking, and I didn't do a deep dive or anything like it on it, but this had to have been the first DNP CD of maybe his life. So this is a different kind of situation for him. And I know I was seeing some, chatter about him talking about the, accomplishments of the last year and everything he's kind of checked off there. And this is a new situation for him here. So what I could glean from it is that he's going to roll with it, but I don't think he loves it.
No, I don't think he loves it either. And I talked to a few people in his inner circle after that DNP CD happened, and they were frustrated for him. They were shocked that Tatum was not in that rotation in the opener. But I think Tatum is playing it exactly the right way. Like, you don't want to be the guy that's griping over minutes after a win in the Olympics. Like, you just don't want to be that guy. And I can understand the whiplash that Jayson Tatum has, because I don't think there's a player in basketball that's had, a better 1 month stretch than Tatum, from winning a championship to signing a $315 million extension to being on the cover of NBA 2K. Like, this guy's had quite the run going on, where he has been getting his accolades, and the respect he deserves. So I get the feeling of, oh damn, like, this is a new feeling for him. But you got to roll with it. I mean, look, this team is not going to need their guys to be alphas, right? Like, they shot 43% from three against South Sudan. Steph Curry was 0 for 6. Like, Steph Curry's
Yep.
struggling with this. Joel Embiid at times has looked like Tim Duncan circa 2004, where he's trying to figure out how to play, the FIBA game. So this is just kind of a team that's going to be pieced together with, one or two guys that have the 18 to 20 point games, and a whole bunch of other guys that have games like Tatum had in the second game, where you have a couple of points, 4 or 5 rebounds, maybe you get a steal, a block. That's just going to be the way it goes. There's not going to be, a lot of outstanding statistics from USA Basketball individually in this tournament.
Yeah, and what does he look like to you when he's actually been out there? The exhibitions, this past game here, not a ton of shots. The three-pointer to me is interesting too, because he's only taken 7 across
Mm.
6 games here, and he is 0 for 7. He's 0 for 11 on jump shots, and that's something that does go back to the playoffs a little bit for him. The jump shot has eluded him a little bit in recent months. He had a strong regular season from 3. But he has gone in these waves with his three-point shooting, and he's in this extended run where he hasn't been able to find it. I was looking at the two-point percentage. He's actually pretty good from there,
Mhm.
59% through this run so far. So when he's taken shots around the rim, that's mostly been what he's done offensively. He's finished in there, but he just hasn't gotten many shot opportunities here. And when he has shot the threes at the very least, I mean, the one he took in this game went off the backboard. He is in the slump
Mhm.
that goes back to the playoffs a little bit. And in terms of what we tangibly look at going into next year for the Celtics, you do wonder where he's at with that jump shot.
Yeah, I sort of separate them to a degree, though, because, like, there's not a lot of fluidity to the USA Basketball offense. Like, it's hard to
Right.
create that kind of fluidity when you have a team that didn't really know each other, at least in terms of playing together, until, early July. When I watch USA Basketball, it's a lot of, high pick and roll, a lot of isolation, a lot of 2-man game, and, Steve Kerr slowly trying to incorporate some more complicated sets. But if you watch the teams they're playing against, it's totally different. Like, Germany, which has been playing together for like a decade, like, they run like a fairly comprehensive offense. Even South Sudan, the youngest country to ever make the Olympics, like, they've had a bunch of guys that have mostly been playing together for the last 4 or 5 years. So uh, the shots that Tatum's getting, they're not the kind of shots he was getting in Boston, right? Like, he's not, getting the driving kick types of shots, corner threes, things like that. And he's certainly not getting, the 20-25 touches per game that he's used to getting. So it's going to be an adjustment. I do agree. Next season, when we get into the year, if he's still missing with that 3-point shot, you start talking about a different conversation. But as far as this goes, I love that he is going to the basket and he is trying to play in transition, because I think there's a lot where a lot of his points are going to be scored, attacking the rim, getting to the free throw line like he did really well with the Celtics this past year, getting clean, in rhythm, open threes with this team is going to be challenging, I think, not just for Tatum, but for all these guys.
Yeah, and I'm interested to see what that approach is for him going into next year. Obviously, he sees double teams, sometimes triple teams in the
Yeah.
finals there with the Celtics, and has to pass out of those. The finishing at the rim has just grown year in and year out, and obviously he's grown stronger too. So I do wonder where his shot selection is going to go into the future of his career. Obviously, there's a team that loves to take threes, Boston. He's been the guy off the dribble that's had to take a lot of them just to get the volume up that they want under Joe Mazzulla here. But the percentage you're looking for on those shots isn't always there for him. So there is always
And
that debate
sometimes,
of
look,
like,
sometimes it's about not shooting them, right? Like, you mentioned
right,
that the finals, and regardless of what Jason Kidd said during the finals, like, Tatum was the the guy they were after, trying to lock down. He was the star.
Oh, they were swarming
Um,
him.
yeah, and I talked to a couple of Mavericks coaches in the aftermath, and they were sort of talking to me about the kind of like multi-pronged defenses that they were throwing at him. Sometimes, literally double teaming him almost every time, making sure he saw two bodies in front of him. That old kind of James Harden defense that we saw with Harden when he was with Houston, just always seeing multiple defenders. One of the strengths I thought Tatum did show during those finals was not forcing it as often as maybe he would have a couple of years ago. And that's going to be the next layer of his development, because those kind of defense is not going anywhere. Like, they're going to keep loading up on him like that and trying to limit his one-on-one situations, open looks. And if he continues to grow as a passer, a playmaker, and to your point, getting to the rim, using that strength and getting to the free throw line, double-digit times per game, I think that's going to more than make up for any kind of erratic shooting that might arise.
Yeah, and it's interesting because he was in a different role earlier in his career, and it's almost funny to look. A lot of the chat. I don't know how much you're on Twitter, Chris, but a lot of the
Mhm.
fans are talking about, oh, he looked like this in 2020, and he's scoring 60 points in 2021, and he's in this more volume shooting, volume scoring role back then. And now you look at his game, and sometimes it's more subtle, his impact on a game. And the passing, certainly in the finals, you see it there. His rebounding has grown. The defense, he's honed in on becoming a borderline all defense caliber guy. And the scoring is not as central to his impact at this point. And I know we'll get into your story a little bit, but one of the things he talks about in there is the respect of what this team has accomplished collectively, not being emulated in the awards as much. And listen, when you're going up against a Luka and an Embiid and some of these guys, Jokic, who are putting up these monumental all-time stat lines, it's tough to break into that MVP level role. And that's, why we nitpick performances like this from him here, because that's what he's trying to get to. He's trying to get to being that number one player in the league, and he's not there yet. He's on the precipice of it. But how difficult do you think it's going to be to parse his performances into the future of his career, where, like you said, he's seeing these double teams, these crowds, he has to pass a lot of the time, teams are playing him to not score. And sometimes his impact just ends up being a little more subtle there. He does have to become one of these guys that is scoring, is putting up these stat sheets at the highest level to
Mhm.
win MVP at this point. But to me, it becomes difficult to evaluate his game sometimes just because of the width of his impact. Like, he has to do so many things. And it almost feels like he's like a master of none sometimes, but he can do
Mm.
everything. So he's one of these guys. I don't know who you'd compare him to all the time at this point, but there's just so many things he does, but there's not one thing that stands out as, oh, he's the elite. He's the best at this point in his career.
Yeah, I think you judge him for the next couple of years at least by team success. Like, I think his window for now of winning an MVP is probably closed because of the talent around him. Because statistically, he's not going to put up the kind of numbers that Luka is probably going to put up next year. Even Jokic, year after year, it's just they're just going to dip just enough, not enough to take him off like an All NBA first team, but enough to keep him in that 4 to 6 range on an MVP ballot. But if you're winning a championship, who gives a damn, right? Like that,
Yeah.
if you're racking up and succeeding on a team level, then it really doesn't matter. I mean, a guy that I think you might be able to compare him to in the next couple of years might even be Durant. Like, and when Durant was with Oklahoma or with Golden State for those few years, where they weren't MVP years, but like when it got to the postseason, that's where Durant made his mark. Clutch time moments, big shots in big games. I mean, you can say what you want about Kevin Durant, but that Golden State team is probably not winning those 2 championships without him, especially the way he played in the finals against Cleveland. I mean, he was outstanding in those performances. So I think it's overall team success and how he performs in those types of situations. If he goes through a regular season where he's a top 10 player in the NBA, top 10 player in the MVP, fine. But then he gets to the playoffs. If he's kind of the guy they can count on down the stretch to make plays and make shots, I think that's the definition of success for Tatum.
There's nothing better during the summer than experiencing a sunny afternoon at the ballpark or maybe a nice summer evening, catching a ball game live in person, not streaming, not on your phone, not on the radio, not on the TV. I remember driving down from Maine every summer. It was a big deal. We get tickets to see the Red Sox at Fenway Park. And I just remember seeing the green grass as you'd walk up through the tunnel. It was like heaven. And I want you to have the same feeling. So go download the Game Time app and go see a game. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, so it's really easy to use. You can get your tickets faster and easier. Plus, as you get closer to the first pitch, the prices on Game Time actually go down. They have killer last minute deals. They have the lowest price guarantee, and you can check out the view from your seats. Now, it's really easy. You just go to your phone, you download the Game Time app, you scan it, and you can see there are great seats to the Sox and the Yankees, or if you want that down-home minor league feeling, you can go see the Woo Sox or your favorite minor league club that's close to you. I go to Worcester and Polo Park. It is a great place to take the family to see a game. Very economical, too. Plus, Game Time also has great deals on the New England Revolution and Patriot preseason games. You can get last-minute deals and save up to 60% off on sports, concerts, comedy, and theater. You can save even more when you choose the section and you let Game Time choose the seats. You always get the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CLNS for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed.
Chris, let's get into your Sports Illustrated story. Really cool story. I'm sure it was very enjoyable to do it. You got the photo shoot there. You got this pullout of, you're talking to Bob Cousy, you're talking to Jayson Tatum, just about this point in Celtics history here. And that is one thing that I love about Tatum is he does embrace the history. He does embrace, Max always tells us his story about how when Tatum saw the documentary about the Celtics Lakers, he was like, damn, I didn't know you were like that, Cedric Maxwell. So it's a cool story here. And I think Tatum spoke pretty honestly about, like we just mentioned, the award situation he's in, the relationship with Brown, a lot of different stuff in here. So what was it just like to do this story? What was the process like of going through it? Obviously, it was after the championship there. How did you just find Jayson at that point in his life after winning that first title? And what was it like to talk to him about all the things you did here?
Well, it came together really fast. One of the reasons that my bosses wanted a Celtics cover is because this was the 70th anniversary issue of Sports Illustrated, and the Celtics, in addition to being the winningest team in NBA history, they also became, with that recent championship, the winningest team in Sports Illustrated's history, right? So the 70-year history of the magazine, the Celtics have won more championships than any team across all major sports leagues. And, there was an SI connection there with Bob Cousy being the first NBA player to ever appear on the cover back in 1956, their first championship year. And of course, Tatum being the star of this most recent championship team. So, connecting those two was kind of what I set out to do. And really, the honest answer is I only had like a few days to do it, to put it together, because the way magazines work nowadays is you got to file stories that are published in, late July in early to mid or mid to late June. So it was a fast process. And look, originally we had a couple of different ideas. We were thinking about getting Tatum and Cousy on the cover together to pose. That didn't work out for logistical reasons. We talked about getting Jaylen Brown involved. He was out of town immediately after winning winning the championship. So it became kind of a Tatum centric story with a Bob Cousy slant. And I had the most fun, I think, talking to Tatum, to your point, about kind of how his connection with the Celtics has grown, because this was a guy that grew up in St. Louis worshiping Kobe Bryant. Like, he did not know anything about the Celtics. Like, he knew who Larry Bird was, but I knew who Paul Pierce was because Paul was kind of that generation. But you put up a Facebook of Havlicek and Satch Sanders and some of the guys from yesteryear, and he's probably not IDing them at all. So his connection with the Celtics and his desire to be known as one of those all-time greats, that was one of the more interesting parts of our conversation. And with Kuzi, Kuzi's body is a train wreck. He'll be the first to admit that, but his
Yeah.
mind is still sharp as a tack. Like, he still has it all there upstairs. I think he's gonna be 96 in a couple of days, actually. So it's incredible that he's still as sharp as he is. And we just got into a lot of the kind of history back then of what it was like to play in an era where you kind of had to have two jobs to be an NBA player. Like, Kuzi was running camps to make money in the offseason. He needed that shoe deal or the shoe money that came in. And Kuzi takes a lot of pride in kind of being the foundation for what has become of, like, the Players Association, what has become, how the money has changed over the years. I mean, Kuzi founded the NBA Players Association, and he made a joke
Yeah.
to me about how he's like, look, I held out at one point for $9,000 so Jaylen Brown could get his $300 million. So, Kuzi not only has pride in what he accomplished as a player, but he also takes a lot of pride in what the work he did early on to lay the foundation for the union and what it has meant to player salaries moving forward.
Yeah, and you get into Jaylen Brown a little bit here in the story too. He and Tatum's relationship. It's interesting as we record this. Gordon Hayward retired today, and that was the genesis of Tatum moving into the starting lineup. Those guys taking bigger roles in their first and second years, and their partnership just vaulting from that point on. They make the East Finals that first year with Hayward and Irving out, and from that point on, it's just been winning for those two guys. And
Mm.
you go through these swells of, I think you've talked about it. Right from when Brown was drafted, this trade rumors, right from when Tatum's drafted, this trade rumors, and those guys are just dealing with their partnership on a public level through these highs and lows. 2021, it got pretty tenuous. 2022, you're saying, can they play together? And
Mm.
then over the next handful of years, they grow that partnership to a championship level here, and it's pretty amazing to look back on. Just being around them myself, I felt like both of them to some degree don't love talking about it just because there's been so much made of it publicly over the last handful of years, especially. But Tatum in the story sounded pretty honest in terms of, obviously the quote everybody's talking about here is him saying, he probably should have had Brown's back publicly at different points, during some of maybe those trade sagas or just different points where that relationship was being discussed. How'd that come up here? And what did you make of that comment by him here, saying that, maybe I should have had Jalen's back, of whether it was the Kevin Durant trade saga, whatever
Mm.
situation it might have been.
Yeah, I opened the door to it. I pushed pretty hard to get an honest reaction from him on it. And look, and you've been around them as long as I have. Like, I first started writing about their relationship back in 2020 in the bubble when I was in there, and that was the first time I got to spend time talking to both of those guys about their history. I mean, look, they were like, teammates at these summer camps. They've known each other for years, and Jaylen Brown was one of the guys that pushed for the drafting of Jayson Tatum. That's a story that's been well documented. When Danny Ainge called Jaylen, said, "What do you think of this guy?" And Jaylen gave him his full-throated support. So they've always had a good and healthy relationship. What they are not, and what they will probably never be, is these thick as thieves friends that do everything together. They're just two very different guys who live their lives in very different ways off the court. That's not a bad thing, and it's certainly not something that's rare in today's NBA. I mean, not every set of great teammates hangs out on off days, but that's just the way that they are and the way that they're always going to be. And Tatum, if you ask him, and I did this, I remember back in 2020, and I did it in 2022 when I put the Celtics on the cover. Then he will tell you that he loves playing with Jaylen Brown. He only wants to play with Jaylen Brown. What he hasn't done over the years, and what, as he says in the story, he regrets, is that he has been more proactive about saying that. Like, he'll answer your question about it, and he'll do it in a way that tells you that he wants Jaylen to be around. But like, when rumors come up, he's not out there on social media or out there taking his opinion to the media that he doesn't want this stuff to happen. He wants to play with Jaylen. That's something I think that if he could go back in time and do it differently over the years, he would do it a lot differently, because his attitude was always like, I'm just going to stay out of it. I'm going to stay above the fray here. Like, I don't need to inject my opinion into all this. I'll let the team do whatever it wants to do. But I think if he could do it all over again, when this stuff came up with Kawhi Leonard and Anthony Davis and Kevin Durant, I think he'd be more vocal about saying, like, yeah, great players, but we got a great team. We got Jaylen Brown. Our chemistry works. We're going to win together. That's something that definitely I found weighed on Tatum during our conversation.
Yeah, and that Durant one in particular, it's crazy to look back on, because when that rumor
After
emerged
the
and Durant's
finals, crazy.
playing at that level, yeah, I sat here and I'm like, you have to consider it. You have to look into a trade like that, given the player Durant is. And now when you look back on it, and I know the reporting at the time was it would have been Brown and White and picks for years, that probably would have been a bad move for Boston, given that Brown was about to grow into a Finals MVP caliber player there. And that summer, when you look back on it, you didn't hear much from Tatum. You didn't hear much from the organization. And that rumor festered for weeks, maybe even a month plus there, where you're like, all right, you doing Brown for Durant? Would you trade him? Would you not? Is he going to be here? And then it followed into that next season where you're debating that extension there. And that's kind of crazy to look back on now, too, where you're like, $300 million for Jaylen. And that looks like a slam dunk given the player he's become now. So that year or two for Jaylen there was pretty important, too. And he made his mind known through many different interviews and things he said at that time that he wanted the appreciation. He wanted to be more, I guess just appreciated is the right way to say it. And whether it's the contract or the awards now, and he obviously has shared his gripes about the Team USA process this summer now as well. But it's amazing given where he was in this dynamic, where he's marginalized and thrown down to that number 2 behind Tatum a lot of the time, that he comes out this summer, obviously after securing what was the largest contract in NBA history, as Finals MVP, East Finals MVP. And there's obviously still a chip on his shoulder here, what you see with the USA process. But his dynamic in this process has been pretty amazing to watch too.
Yeah, and on the trade rumors, like, I think they've all bothered Jaylen Brown to some degree, but the 2022 stuff I know really bothered him. When I did the cover story that had Jaylen and Jayson and Marcus Smart on the cover, one of the interviews I did was with Ime Udoka because the story was basically written before the stuff with Ime came up, and he had to leave the team. And it's an interview that will be forever lost to the digital archives because it doesn't have any relevance anymore. But one of the conversations we had in that interview was about, he acknowledged the need to kind of heal things or, clear things up with Jaylen Brown going into, that training camp as they prepared to go into that training camp. He and Brad Stevens had some repair work to do because Jaylen, from what I was told, was upset to see his name in trade rumors just weeks after he helped lead that team to the finals, coming off a brilliant year with the Celtics. So, that was one of those situations where I think there was tension, not with Jaylen and Jayson, but tension with Jaylen and the team. And maybe going back, that's another example of where Jayson could have been more proactive in saying, forget all this. Like, we're right there knocking on the doorstep of winning a championship. This is the team that we want. But at the same time, as I think of it, like, another part of the conversation I had with Jayson was that he said to me, I was asking about kind of like, did you ever have any doubts, right? About whether you could do it, whether his team could do it. And he talked specifically about that summer of 2022, where they get beat in the finals by Golden State. Jayson does not play well in that series. And he told me he went into that offseason, wondering, like, am I the guy? Like, can I be the guy like, a Steph, like a KD, like a Giannis more recently? Can I be the guy to lead a team to a championship? There was doubt creeping in for several weeks during that offseason. Now, he eventually got over it, got past it, and obviously here we are today. But, while all that stuff with Jaylen Brown and Kevin Durant was going on, I think Jayson, for a while, was going through his own kind of crisis of confidence and trying to figure out sort of his place in the NBA. So it was kind of a perfect storm of weird events that off season that led to everything that happened.
Yeah, and you of course can go find that story over on Sports Illustrated. The 70th anniversary edition is out now as well. I want to get your thoughts on two of the other biggest stories of the offseason with the Celtics. Obviously, Kristaps Porzingis is going to miss a good chunk of the season here after the injury he suffered in the finals, and that game one is going to go down as maybe the moment of the championship run, the most exciting moment alongside Pritchard's half court heave and all the other stuff you saw in that series. But uh, after coming back from the injury, obviously a major fallout here where he's going to have to miss a significant portion of time. And this team affirmed itself in many ways last year. They won a ton of games with Porzingis out, but they never had to play without him for this long. And so you're looking at Al Horford as the starter next year. They bring back Tillman. They bring back Coronet. Kate is back as well. So there's a number of options in that front court, and I'm sure they can play smaller as well to try to get through this span without him. But I'm interested to see how it plays out because Horford is another year older. All those depth guys at center are specialists or a guy who hasn't played a ton in the NBA in Kata's case there. So a team coming off a championship that had a long run, sometimes you have those hangover situations going into the next year. And it doesn't help that you're missing this pivotal of a guy for this long here. So I'm interested to see how it plays out. They showed they can play without him last year, but this is going to be a challenge for them from the jump next year.
I think it's going to be really challenging, and I think going into the new year, going into January 1st, I think it's possible, maybe even likely, that they're kind of a very average team, or looking like it, sort of in the middle of the Eastern Conference playoff bracket. Going into kind of that mid-season point, because I mean, yeah, they won games without Porzingis, but to your point, he was in the mix, right? He was playing, 2 out of every 4, 3 out of every 5, or whatever it was. And Horford, even though he seems to be ageless, you do wonder at age 38 just how many minutes can you play him. He's obviously not going to play many back-to-backs, many 3 games in 4 nights. And then you're counting on guys like Tillman and Cornette and some of the younger, unproven guys to play more substantial minutes. And look, I think Denver is a good, kind of example to look at. Like, Denver had a hangover last season. Like, Denver, they were tired. They maybe weren't as motivated early on. They were in a different position than they were the year before, where instead of being the hunter, they were the hunted, and they got everybody's best shot, regardless of who was out on the floor, every single night. I think the Celtics can expect a lot of that. I mean, they've got all these guys. Like, I think it's great they're playing for USA Basketball, but when do any of these guys get any downtime? Like, when is the vacation coming for Tatum, for Drew Holiday, right? Like, I saw some things on Tatum's schedule. Like, he's coming back from the Olympics. He's got a golf tournament coming up. I'm sure he's got other obligations he's got to do in August, early September. Like, there's only going to be, a matter of weeks for them to really power down and get ready for the next season. And, I think that's going to cost them something. I do think they're going to struggle out of the gate. I do think they're going to have kind of a mediocre start to next season. Now, that may not matter, because if they get to February and Porzingis is back and everybody's a little bit more rested and healthy, then they can go on a run in the second half of the season. But I think this next year is going to be a pretty challenging one. I think for Joe Mazzulla, for the front office, for all the guys there, and trying to find a way to get off to at least a decent start, because I think it's going to be a struggle early on.
Yeah, and this other one that shocked everybody, Wyc Grousbeck selling the team. We'll see what happens with the ownership shift here. It seems, at least early on, that it probably is going to go to Peg Liuca and maybe some other people get involved there. But Wyc Grousbeck comes out basically a week after the season, 2 weeks after the season ends, and they announce that he's selling the team, and you get the stories about his father's involvement and all that stuff there. So this is an interesting one. Probably wouldn't be as interesting if there wasn't such a big money question around this team over the next year or two. And obviously their payroll is going to balloon plus tax to $500 million in 2026 following this next season here. So who's the owner going to be? What's the money situation? what's their willingness to pay that level, or even ability to pay that level of salary plus tax going forward beyond the Grousbeck era here is a major, major question for this team. Obviously, they're going to run it back this year, but who's in control? Who's making decisions in 2026? Can they maintain this much of a payroll after extending Holiday, White, Tatum, as well as Sam Hauser over the last handful of weeks here? This is a big story. It might not interest people a ton in all the different things we're talking about here, but I'm just fascinated by how this is going to play out here. And everything I'm hearing is that they're going to take the money year by year and just see where they are contention-wise, regardless of where this ownership situation goes. But Chris, whoever controls the team at that point is ultimately going to make the call of how much they're spending and what the budget is going into the future.
I think year by year is exactly how they're going to take it. I think the only thing that can protect this roster and keep it intact year after year is a championship. Honestly, like I think that just getting to the Eastern Conference Finals, just getting to the finals is not enough to be certain that ownership, whether it's the Grousbeck family or whoever comes in and buys the majority stake in the team, that's the only thing that's going to ensure that they keep this team together. Because some of the deals they've done over the last couple of months and into last season, like they've signed guys to extension, they've locked guys down, guys like Holiday and guys like White and guys like Sam Hauser, but they're signed to very tradable contracts, right? Like you can move off these deals pretty quickly if you wanted to in the offseason. All these guys I mentioned are appealing players. Like they will be desirable on the trade market. So if next season for some reason is a flop and they get beat in the second round for whatever reason, I would think somebody would have to go. Sam Hauser, look, that's a great deal on the sort of the surface for Sam Hauser, but you and I both know that it's not in a vacuum here. Like that Sam Hauser contract, it costs a lot when it comes to tax penalties with this team, exponentially more when it comes to tax penalties. So I think it's the attitude for the Celtics and the players in that locker room is going to have to be championship or bust. If they win a championship next year, I am certain the entire group will be run back again. Maybe you have to figure out where Al Horford's at that point in his career, what kind of contract that he'd be worth at that point. But you're going to bring back Hauser and Holiday and White and all the key pieces on that team. If not, I think we'll be talking about kind of a pared down roster in the future, because it's just even though owning an NBA team is probably one of the most lucrative propositions in sports or in any business, because you can just turn around and sell it for $5 or $6 billion if you want. Like these tax penalties are massive. You're talking about $300-400 million in overall payroll and penalties, and even the richest of owners don't really want to pay that. Now, too, you have all the issues that come with having a team that's into that second apron, the inability to do deals because you're paying that much money. So it's a reality of this team. Like every year they go into for the next 2 or 3 years, it's got to be championship or bust, because without a championship, you run the risk that ownership is going to break this team apart.
Have you heard anything about who could get involved in this sale? Is it going to be pretty similar faces, you feel like, or could there be like a big tech finance name, Bezos type coming in here and, shocking everybody with a big, bid for this team?
One thing I've heard consistently is that people inside the Celtics, including, people associated with the Grousbeck family, they would like to do a deal with Pagliuca, right? They would like to keep some continuity with ownership, and that would be a seamless transition. I don't know that Pagliuca would welcome the idea of Wick continuing to be the governor of that team. Like Pag's a basketball guy. Like I think Pags really wants to be the team governor. I think he wants to be the face of ownership with that team. So that may be a bit of a thorny situation to kind of unpack. But if he has the money and if he can put together the money, I think there's motivation to get a deal done there. All that being said, I don't think he's getting a hometown discount for this. I think obviously one of the reasons that this team is being put up for sale is that H. Irving Grousbeck, who owns most of this team, is trying to get his affairs together. They said that effectively in the statement. So they want to get as much money as they possibly can for this team. NBA team valuations have never been higher. So I do believe it is going to go to the highest bidder. I've not heard about an outside bidder as of yet. What I have heard is that, they are going to open this thing up. And if somebody comes out there and says, we'll give you, an extra $340 million more for this team than, someone like Pagliuca or somebody else might be willing to bid, it's going to go to that high bidder. It's just as simple as that. So I do think we've got a long way to go with this ownership process, because I think it will be an open process for others to bid on.
Well, we'll see where that goes. Think we'll know a lot more by the end of 2024 here, and obviously a big story. Not a ton roster-wise, move-wise this summer for the Celtics, but injuries, the USA stuff, still a ton going on with the Celtics, and appreciate Chris joining us with some great reporting, great knowledge on all of this here. Anything story-wise coming up, reporting-wise you want to shout out here?
No, I'm trying to take a vacation at some point, man. It's like you got all of a sudden you're into August, you're talking NBA preview issue, which is like blowing my mind that I'm already starting to get into that. But hopefully a little bit of downtime, and I do think next season's going to be interesting. I think it's a totally different challenge to go from, the years they spent clawing their way up the ladder to win a championship to being the team that has a championship and trying to defend it. It's challenging. Fortunately for them, they do have, you got Drew Holiday who knows kind of a little bit what that's like. You've got some guys there that have a little bit more experience, but I don't know. I think it's going to be there's going to be some rough nights next season with the Celtics, especially in the first couple of months while Porzingis is out.
Yeah, and there's some good teams out there too. Milwaukee, New York, Oklahoma, I think, is coming this year. So
Yeah,
they're going to have some challengers for sure. And I appreciate you stopping by, Chris. Always want to get you on here. So it was a great time talking to you. And again, check him out, Sports Illustrated. Check out his cover story on Tatum and the Celtics. And of course, you'll be on NBC Sports Boston next year. As always, appreciate it, Chris. Good talking to you here.
You got it, Bobby. Anytime.